The unexpected selection. Captain Eric "Buck" Rogers had lived through countless battles, his career in the Earth Defense Fleet spanning years of perilous missions and near-death experiences. But none of that prepared him for what had just occurred. He had just narrowly escaped a harrowing dogfight with an alien fighter. Weaving through the debris of a broken warship, his sleek starfighter Aegis screaming through space at breakneck speeds. Each turn was a fight for survival, each pulse of the plasma cannons a heartbeat closer to victory or death. But even victory wasn't enough to guarantee safety. The chaos of the battle had taken its toll, and now Buck was grounded. His ship was in ruins, an endless array of twisted metal and broken circuits scattered across the surface of an alien planet. The moment his fighter's hull crashed through the planet's atmosphere, Buck had braced for impact, praying that his inertial dampers would hold long enough to soften the landing. The roar of flames and the sickening jolt of the crash echoed in his skull, a disorienting mess of sound and light that made him question whether he'd make it through this one. The ship skidded across the uneven surface, grinding to a halt with a violent shudder as the last of the flames from the wreckage curled into the alien atmosphere. Breathing heavily, Buck wiped the sweat from his brow as he clambered out of the cockpit, ignoring the searing pain that shot through his side. He glanced down and winced. A shard of metal from his own ship had embedded itself just below his ribs, blood seeping through his flight suit. His hands were trembling, but Buck refused to let it show. This was just another day at the office. He'd been through worse. The comms were dead, the system fried from the impact. He could no longer reach his squadron, his comrades who would normally have his back in such a situation. He was alone, stranded in an unfamiliar place, far from the war zone he'd just escaped. A sense of isolation and vulnerability began to creep in. The barren landscape stretched out before him, a desolate world that seemed to go on forever. There were no signs of life, no rescue ships on their way, just an empty, lifeless horizon with a sickly orange sky. "All right, Buck, pull it together," he muttered under his breath, adjusting his helmet and checking the pulse of his life support systems. "You're not dead yet. Focus." Despite his calm exterior, Buck couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. This planet wasn't just another uncharted wasteland. He had a sense in his gut, that gut instinct that had kept him alive through countless battles, that told him this was different. He wasn't just stranded, he was being watched. The distant howl of wind cut through the eerie silence, the only sound breaking the stillness of the alien landscape. Buck squinted into the horizon, feeling an odd unease that he couldn't explain. The wreckage of his ship was a few hundred meters away, but it felt like miles, as if the landscape itself stretched further than the eye could see. It wasn't long before he realized he wasn't alone. As he stood there, scanning the horizon, he saw movement from the corner of his eye. His body instinctively tensed, and his hand reached for his sidearm, the cool metal of the weapon giving him a small sense of comfort. The shadows grew longer as the wind began to howl louder, and soon, Buck saw what had been watching him. A figure emerged from the distant shadows, walking slowly toward him. The figure was tall, even by human standards, and had a powerful presence that radiated authority. Her skin was a vibrant shade of green, and her features were sharp, almost regal. She wore intricate armor that gleamed in the light, a perfect blend of futuristic tech and ancient warrior design. She wasn't alone either. Behind her, a line of similarly armored figures, all women, emerged from the rocks, moving with the grace and precision of predators. Buck's heart pounded as he quickly scanned the group. The women stood tall, their expressions impassive, as though they were used to intimidating anyone who came near. They were unlike any race he had encountered before. Their attire and demeanor spoke of strength, fierce warriors, not native to this planet. The green-skinned leader approached Buck slowly, her gaze locking onto him with an intensity that made his stomach tighten. Her voice, when she spoke, was smooth and commanding, but there was an edge to it that hinted at the centuries of power behind her words. "You are an anomaly," she said, her voice like a melody that sent a shiver down Buck's spine. "A human. Strong. Healthy. Resilient. We have searched for the strongest genes in the galaxy. And now, it seems we have found them." Buck's brow furrowed in confusion as he stood motionless, not sure how to respond. He couldn't afford to show weakness now, not in front of these women. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what she meant. The strongest genes in the galaxy. What were they talking about? One of the other women, equally tall and imposing, stepped forward, her eyes scanning Buck's form with a mixture of curiosity and approval. "You will be perfect," she added, her tone softer but no less authoritative. "We have selected you." Buck's mind reeled. Selected for what? He opened his mouth to ask, but before he could, the first woman raised a hand to silence him. "You have been chosen as our breeding male," she declared, her voice unwavering. "Your strength, your genes, your resilience, all of these make you the perfect candidate. We are a race of women, and we have long sought a male who can match us. We will use your genes to build the next generation of warriors, stronger and more powerful than any before." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Breeding male. What kind of insane system was this? He was no scientist, but he knew enough to understand what they were saying. These women, these Amazonian-like beings, had come to Earth looking for a mate, not just for any mate, but for the one with the strongest genetic makeup. He was to be the foundation of their future warriors. Buck's mind raced. He couldn't believe it. He had thought he was here to survive, to escape, but now, it seemed like he was caught in the middle of some alien breeding experiment. These women weren't just looking for a male to help their species survive. They were trying to create an entire army, one built on strength, power, and perhaps most dangerously, human genes. "We have been watching your species," the leader continued, her voice dripping with purpose. "And now, you will be part of our future." As she spoke, Buck felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about a decision. A choice he never expected to face. A role he had never imagined being forced into. The question now was, would he fight against this, or would he try to escape before it was too late? He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. His life was about to change forever. The chosen one. Captain Eric Buck Rogers stood there, his mind racing, his body still reeling from the crash, and the wounds he'd sustained. The words the Amazonian leader had spoken echoed in his mind, replaying over and over like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Breeding male. The phrase hung in the air, oppressive and suffocating. These beings, this alien race, were not asking for his help. They were claiming it. They were demanding that he father their future warriors, that he give them something no other species could. His mind struggled to process it all. The green-skinned woman, who had introduced herself as the leader of this powerful and ancient tribe, stood before him with an air of command. Her eyes glowed with an unearthly fire as she watched him carefully. Every movement she made exuded confidence and dominance, the kind of confidence one might expect from a queen, and she was treating him like an asset, a tool for a purpose he didn't yet fully understand. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice as smooth as silk yet carrying an undeniable weight. "And you, human, have been chosen. We have studied your species, and we have seen that you possess qualities unlike any others. Your strength, your endurance, and your ability to survive in hostile environments make you the perfect candidate for our cause. Your genes will create the perfect warriors, warriors who will carry the bloodline of the Zerath into the future." Buck's chest tightened. His heart was pounding in his ears. He couldn't believe what was happening. These women, this race, had been searching for the strongest beings they could find. And now, they had set their sights on him. But what did they expect from him? He wasn't just some genetic specimen. He was a human. He wasn't about to let them use him as a pawn in their war of survival. But as much as he wanted to resist, his body, battered and bloodied, betrayed his desire for escape. He was stranded on their planet, alone, with no way of contacting his people. The odds were stacked against him. "Why me?" Buck finally managed to say, his voice strained. His eyes scanned the other women behind Lyra, each of them tall, strong, and imposing. They were all watching him, sizing him up, as if they had already decided that he was their chosen one, and his objections wouldn't matter. But he had to ask. He needed to understand why they had picked him. Lyra's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "We know that your species is capable of immense strength, of survival against the odds. You are a product of millennia of evolution, one of the few species in the galaxy that can survive in such harsh conditions. And you are adaptable. Unlike other races we have encountered, humans possess a remarkable ability to learn, to grow, to overcome. That is why you are the one we need." Buck's fists clenched. He had heard all this before. He had seen countless alien species that thought their way of life was the only way. He'd fought wars on worlds that believed their strength came from their power, their weaponry, their superiority. But none of those races had ever taken him, a mere human, and tried to manipulate him into becoming their pawn. These women, this race, were no different. They were using his strength for their own gain. "So, what now?" Buck demanded, his voice barely a whisper, though it was filled with tension. He was trying to understand the situation, but the fear and uncertainty clouded his thoughts. What did they expect him to do? "You expect me to just comply? To give you my genes so you can create your perfect warriors, just like that?" Lyra's eyes glinted. "It is not a request. It is an obligation. The survival of our people depends on it. Our race is dying, and we are unable to reproduce on our own. We have been forced to search beyond our own kind to find a male whose genes are strong enough to ensure our continued existence. You will help us breed the next generation. You will help us secure the future of this Earth." Buck stepped back, his mind swimming with the implications. These women were not just interested in his genetics. They were desperate. They had lost their ability to reproduce, and now they were turning to other species for their survival. And for all their strength and power, they were reliant on him, on a single human male. But as Buck looked at Lyra, he saw something else in her eyes. It wasn't just desperation or the desire to preserve her race. There was something deeper, something more calculating. She had a plan, a purpose. She wasn't asking for his help because she was helpless. She was taking him because she knew that, despite his resistance, he wouldn't have a choice, and that thought made his blood run cold. "What happens if I refuse?" Buck asked, though he already had a sinking feeling about the answer. Lyra's expression hardened, her features sharpening as if she had expected the question. "Refusal is not an option. You will comply, or you will die. If you resist, we will find another way to ensure our survival. We do not need you alive for the process to work, but we would prefer it that way. You will serve your purpose, whether you wish to or not." The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Buck realized that she wasn't bluffing. There was no escape. He was trapped, caught between the reality of his situation and the weight of the decision he was being forced to make. But there was something else Lyra had said that stuck in his mind. She had mentioned that his strength, his resilience, was exactly what they needed. What if that was true? What if this was his chance to prove that humanity, despite everything, could survive, could endure, could thrive even in the face of impossible odds? Could he use this situation to his advantage, to fight back, to gain the upper hand in a battle that wasn't just about physical strength? His thoughts were interrupted as the women behind Lyra stepped forward, surrounding him, their expressions unreadable. They weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to plead. They were here for one thing, and one thing only, to claim him. "We will take you to our citadel," Lyra said, her voice low, but filled with finality. There you will learn what is required of you. You will see what our needs are, and you will understand why we have chosen you." Buck stood still, his heart pounding. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to resist, to fight, to run. But in his gut, he knew that there was no running from this. Not now. The Zereth women moved toward him, their movements as fluid and efficient as predators closing in on their prey. Buck's mind raced, and for the first time in his life, he realized that survival wasn't just about fighting back. It was about playing the game. He had no choice but to play their game. For now, the Citadel of Zereth. The journey from the crash site to the Zereth Citadel was longer than Buck had anticipated, and the unease gnawing at him only grew with each step. The terrain was alien, a harsh and unforgiving landscape of jagged rock formations, swirling dust storms, and towering, strange flora that appeared to have evolved to survive the planet's extreme conditions. The air was thick, and the sky above, a dark violet hue, only added to the ominous atmosphere. Buck walked in silence, his mind working overtime as he struggled to piece together the pieces of his situation. The Zereth had made it clear he was their chosen male, and despite his objections, they were going to make him comply. But what could he do? His body was still bruised and battered from the crash, and though his training had prepared him for many things, this was a scenario unlike any he had faced before. He had no allies here, no reinforcements, and no way of contacting Earth. He was at their mercy. Lyra walked beside him, her tall form exuding an undeniable authority. Her green skin shimmered under the planet's dim sun, and her eyes, those intense golden orbs, never left him. Every so often, she would glance at him, her gaze calculating, as though she were studying him, waiting for his next move. The other Zereth women followed closely behind, their presence a constant reminder that they were watching his every step, every reaction. Despite the harsh circumstances, Buck couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the Zereth women. They were tall, athletic, and undeniably powerful. Their strength was evident in their posture, in the way they moved, like predators with unmatched precision. They weren't just warriors. They were a species built for survival, and it was that survival instinct, Buck realized, that had led them to him. They needed his strength, his human resilience, to help them continue their race. It was a chilling thought. As they continued their trek across the barren landscape, Buck found himself struggling to keep his thoughts focused. What were these women truly like? He had been told that the Zereth had no males of their own species, that they had turned to other races in desperation. But surely there was more to their story. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving in their own way. How had they come to this point? Why had they chosen a human male? After several hours of travel, the rocky terrain began to smooth out, and Buck could see the silhouette of a massive structure looming in the distance. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. A towering citadel, built into the very rock of the planet. The architecture was both ancient and advanced, with sharp lines and sweeping curves that seemed to defy logic. The structure pulsed with a faint energy, as if it were alive, responding to some unseen force. "This is where we live," Lyra said, her voice breaking through Buck's thoughts. "The Citadel of Zereth. It has been our home for centuries." Buck nodded, his curiosity piqued despite the tension in his chest. He had to admit, the Citadel was impressive, and for the first time since he had crash-landed on this planet, he felt a flicker of wonder. What kind of civilization had built this place? What kind of power did they wield? As they approached the Citadel, Buck was led through a massive, arching gateway. The walls were made of a dark, metallic material that shimmered in the low light, and the air seemed to hum with energy. It was as though the entire structure was designed to channel and amplify the power of the Zereth. Buck could feel the weight of their history, their culture, pressing down on him. Inside, the Citadel was just as imposing. Long corridors stretched out before him, illuminated by a soft, green glow that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. The space was vast, with high ceilings that made Buck feel small despite his height. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings and symbols, each one telling the story of the Zereth people, their victories, their struggles, their survival. Lyra led him through the hallways, her footsteps echoing through the empty space. Buck noticed that the other Zereth women had begun to disperse, moving off to different areas of the citadel, leaving him and Lyra alone. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken words, the tension hanging between them like a fog. They finally came to a large chamber, a circular room with a high domed ceiling. In the center of the room stood an altar-like structure, a large stone table surrounded by glowing symbols. It was clear that this was a place of significance, a place where important rituals and decisions were made. Buck's heart rate quickened as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just a holding area. This was where he would be expected to fulfill his role. "Sit," Lyra commanded, her voice calm but firm. Buck hesitated, but there was no escaping her authority. He sat on the stone bench beside the altar, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on him. Lyra moved around him, her movements graceful and calculated. She stood at the head of the altar, her golden eyes never leaving his. "You must understand," Lyra began, her voice softer now, though still carrying the power of command. "The Zereth have existed for millennia, and we have faced many trials. Our species has endured wars, natural disasters, and the loss of our ability to reproduce. We have turned to other species, but it is not just about survival. It is about the future. Our future. We cannot continue on the path we are on without changing our ways. The strength we need must come from outside our race. And you are the key." Buck looked at her, his mind spinning. "You're asking me to be part of some breeding program, to give you my genetics. But why? Why choose me?" Lyra's eyes softened slightly, though there was still an intensity behind them. "We have studied many species, human. We know the strength that lies within your genes. You are more resilient than any other race we've encountered. Your species has endured against overwhelming odds, and that is exactly what we need. We will create a new generation, one that will carry the best qualities of both our species." Buck clenched his jaw, his fists tightening. He didn't want to be a pawn in their game. He didn't want to be forced into a situation where he had no control. But as much as he wanted to fight back, he realized that resisting would do little good. He had to think beyond just survival. If he was going to be forced into this, he needed to find a way to turn the tables, to use this situation to his advantage. "What happens now?" Buck asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Now we begin the process. You will be tested. Your strength, your endurance, your resilience, all of it will be measured. Only then will we proceed." Buck's stomach tightened as the reality of the situation sank in. This was it. He had no choice but to go through with their tests. He had to survive, for himself and for humanity. But as Lyra began to move toward the altar, Buck's mind raced. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He had no idea what kind of future lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let the Zereth use him without a fight.